When Charlene decided it was time for them to start a family, Phil was ecstatic and started building an addition into the house for the baby's room. Then, without warning, the bottom fell out from beneath them and a dark cloud parked itself over their happy home. After the first couple of months, there was only a wee bit of concern that Charlene wasn't pregnant yet. But after 8 months, it was obvious there was a problem. They began the first of what would become dozens of clinic visits and tests, and soon, even the thought of making love to his sweet, sexy wife was a routine governed by her ovulation cycle. When it became clear that she would never have a child, she sunk into a depression that lasted a whole year. Phil was at his wits' end and enlisted the help of counselors, books, and therapists. He was on the verge of giving up and admitting his marriage was over when one day she woke up and decided it was time to put the dark clouds behind them and accept the fact that they weren't going to have children. After a long talk, a lot of apologizing, and hours of making up, she was again her old self, and like magic, they were in love again. Phil didn't care what it cost. He was willing to do any and everything to keep his wife happy. And happy they were. Then came the phone call from the children's services, and suddenly the dark clouds were hiding just around the corner from his house, threatening to block the sun from his perfect life again. They had long, heated discussions about Charlene taking the children, but in the end, she won. Firstly, because he couldn't deny his wife anything, and secondly, because she assured him this was a temporary arrangement until they could find another relative able to take the children. So he said yes. But it wasn't long before he was regretting his decision because he could see the effect having the children around was having on his wife. Although she was having a little trouble with the boy adjusting, the girls were another story. She was head over heels in love with them and they with her. And when the time came to send them away, he knew there would be trouble. Knowing his wife would never make the move to send the children away on her own, he decided to take it upon himself to end this nightmare that was threatening to engulf his marriage. Sure, Charlene would be angry when she found out what he had done, but when he saw how the boy was getting more and more belligerent and the girls were getting more and more attached to Charlene, he knew it was time for them to go. After all, he reasoned with himself, it had been 2 months, and nobody can say they hadn't done all they could to help these poor children. It was somebody else's turn to be the good Samaritan, and besides, he was ready to get his wife back. When he called TJ and told him he had to come get the kids right away or he was going to put in a call to child services, it was agreed he would come get them this weekend. Phil knew it was sudden, but just like taking off a band aid, it was better to do it quick. That way they could get it over with and get on with their lives. As expected, Charlene was furious when he told her what he had done, but he refused to change his mind and began packing their clothes for their departure. Charlene stopped speaking to him. The girls were crying, and the boy just shrugged his shoulders and turned to walk away, but not before looking at his crying sisters and saying, I told you so. The day Denise arrived to take the kids were a traumatic one for everyone, especially the girls. They had gotten used to Charlene and did not want to leave, so they clung to her, crying and begging her not to send them away. Jay, on the other hand, was indifferent. He had decided not to get attached to anyone anymore because it meant you had to trust someone, and he was determined never to trust anyone again, especially God. The crocodile tears shed by his Aunt Charlene did not move him at all. If anything, it gave him a bit of pleasure knowing the superficial witch was so unhappy. Although he felt a twinge of sadness at the pitiful cries of his two sisters, he knew it was for the best that they leave because staying here would only bring them a false sense of security that was sure to hurt even greater later. Denise knew taking the children was not going to be an easy task, but the enormity of just how hard it was going to be hit home when she saw how attached the girls had gotten to Charlene compared to the indifference of Jay. She had been praying ever since she had agreed to take the children, but the closer she had gotten to the children, the more troubled her spirit had become. She looked at their miserable, sad little faces, and her heart ached from just imagining what they had gone through. The departure was every bit as hard as she thought it was going to be, and the girls cried until they fell asleep. When they all got to TJ's house, he tried to get Denise to spend the night with him and his family, but she was determined to stick to the plan they had agreed on. Sis, I am so proud of you, and you know you can call me anytime you need me, don't you? Of course I do, silly, and I'm proud of you too. What are you proud of me for? I didn't do anything. You're the one taking on three extra children. It was you that called around and helped find a home for the kids in the first place. You could just as easily have turned your back on them when they first called you about Tracy, but I'm so glad you followed your heart. Thank you, Nisi. And I don't have to say I love you, he said, hugging her hard. No, you don't, she said, hugging him back. But let me get these kids something to eat. Yeah, take care and call me as soon as you get home. Denise returned to her car and turned to look at the three sets of eyes that were observing her warily from the back seat. Is anybody hungry? I thought maybe we could stop at McDonald's or White Castle or something. Do you guys have a favorite food to eat or what? No? Okay, then I'll just go to my favorite place and you guys can tell me what you want. When no one answered, Denise sighed, started the car, and headed towards a highway, determined to stop at the first fast food restaurant she saw. An hour later, she and the three children were standing in line at a Wendy's, trying to decide what to eat. Okay, what does everybody want? The three children just looked at each other and then down to the floor. Look, I can't even begin to imagine what you three are feeling right about now. But we are going to be with each other for a long time. Let's just leave all the getting acquainted stuff for later and focus on getting us all something to eat, okay? Because to tell you the truth, I'm starving. With that, Denise walked over to the register and began ordering for herself, hoping her lead would prompt the kids to follow suit. Can my sister and I get a number two? Came a timid reply from behind her. Turning, she saw Mimi and her sister holding hands and looking so adorable it made her smile in spite of herself. Of course you can. And what about you, little man? Aren't you going to eat something? Jay shrugged and said he didn't care what she got for him. You can have whatever you want, but you will have to tell me what that is. I don't know what you like. He usually likes a number five, said Christine, looking at her brother, who just rolled his eyes at her and turned to walk to a set of empty seats. Thank you, sweetie, she said, and turned her attention to the employee at the register as the girls joined their brother. When their order was ready, She called Jay to help her with the trays, and they all sat down to eat. No matter how she tried to start a conversation, all she got was one answered replies from the children. So she decided to give it a rest, and they ate the remainder of their meal in a strained, uncomfortable silence. Back in the car, Denise turned on her music, having decided not to press the children into conversation, and headed toward a local hotel so they could rest after this emotional day of new beginnings. She was so preoccupied with the music and with looking for a place for them to rest, she almost didn't hear the tiny voice from the back seat thanking her for the food they had just eaten. "Thank you for the food, Mrs. Jones," said Mimi, sounding polite and very timid. "Oh, you're welcome, sweetheart. I hope it was enough to hold you guys for the night. I know it's not a real dinner, but when we get home, you'll get a good home cooked meal that will fill your little tummies and warm your toes. And you children don't have to be so formal. You can all call me Aunt Nisi, okay?" There was no reply. Not that she was really expecting one, but that thank you was enough to warm her heart and fill her with a feeling of hope. She knew Jay was going to be a challenge, but just the fact that Mimi would volunteer to show appreciation meant all hope was not lost. So she smiled inwardly and began humming along with the CC wine and CD she always played whenever she traveled. The rest of the trip was uneventful and quiet as Denise and the children stayed at a Holiday Inn for the night and rose early for the trip home. She decided to stop at an IHOP for breakfast and was surprised at the appetite of little Christine, who ate every bit of her food and asked for a second glass of milk. Wanting to make sure the children knew what kind of family they were going to be living with, Denise made sure the children knelt and prayed before they went to sleep last night and bowed their heads in prayer before they left their hotel room this morning. It was during this morning's prayer at the hotel room that she saw a little ray of hope begin to shine in the direction of Jay, who, when he thought her eyes were closed, sneaked a look at Mimi and gave her a slight nod with his eyebrows raised as if surprised that someone would take the time to pray in the morning. As they were eating breakfast, Denise began telling them about her children and how they were excited and anxious to meet them. Although Mimi was the only one that would converse with her, she could see that she had the interest of Jay and Christine. She told the girls that they would have their own bedroom, which would be right next to hers, and Jay would be sharing a room with Matt, which she was sure was going to be a thrill for the both of them. The more she talked about the girls and the school they would be attending, the more Mimi seemed to get interested in her new life. She could tell from the way she kept looking at her big sister and reading her moods that the key to making little Christine happy was to keep a smile on Mimi's face. And she also saw that even though Jay kept silent and tried to look bored and indifferent, there was a light in his eyes that showed an interest that he tried unsuccessfully to hide. After they had finished breakfast and everyone had gone to the restroom, they all headed toward the car, ready to start the last part of their journey to their new life together. Halfway to the car, Denise noticed that Jay and Mimi seemed to be involved in a very heated conversation and was at first tempted to step in and try to help solve whatever the problem was, but decided to let them handle it for themselves. She continued to walk ahead, but kept a wary eye on them in case things seemed to get out of hand, and was relieved when they appeared to reach an agreement and continued on toward the car.